time to film my monthly wrap up for the month of September. I've read quite a few books this month, like more than my average I would say, so let's not dilly-dally, let's just get on with it, shall we? These are in no particular order. I'll just start with the ones I have physical copies of and then move on to the ones I read on my Kindle. But first things first, I have John Burnside's Glisser. This was my second John Burnside book, and I am sure you've heard me talk about The Dumb House, which I read last month and absolutely adored. I had to read some more John Burnside, so this is supposed to be his favourite book that he's written, so I decided to go for this one next, and I really enjoyed it. I actually prefer The Dumb House, but this was still a 4 out of 5 star read for me, and I did a complete review of it, so I'll link that down below. It's a bit of a mystery horror book, and it's set in a small, like, derelict, rundown, ex-nuclear power station town where young boys have been going missing for years, and everyone's kind of like ignoring it, like nobody's trying to find out why. It deals a lot with themes of life and death, so yeah, I highly recommend this one. It's been a generally really good reading month, so the next one was actually a 5-star book, and that was Ali Smith's The Seer. This is my second Ali Smith book as well. It's been a month for lots of seconds, and this is actually a play. It's her only published play, and I adored this book. 5 out of 5 stars. It's about a couple who live a very mundane life until one day the woman's sister turns up at their door and they invite her in, despite knowing that this woman isn't actually Iona's sister and is just pretending to be. So things escalate from there. There's a lot of crossing the fourth wall. It's really funny and really well written, and usually I'm like unsure about reading plays. I far prefer seeing them performed, but this one I didn't feel like I missed anything not seeing it, although I'm sure it'd be amazing performed. I still enjoyed it just as much reading it. Next up is The Vegetarian by Han Kang. This is Han Kang's only novel that has been translated into English, so I really hope more of them are, because I really enjoyed this book. I'll probably do a full review of this one, although I haven't already. Basically it's about this woman in South Korea who decides to become a vegetarian, although she actually decides to become a vegan because she doesn't eat like animal byproducts or milk or cheese or anything like that. But she doesn't really, it isn't really a sane moral choice. It is basically the beginning of you watching her spiral downwards mentally. The book is told from 3 different perspectives. The first section told from the perspective of her husband, who kind of just sees her as like a house cleaner and someone that cooks his meals. The second section is told from the perspective of her sister's husband, who kind of sexually objectifies her and sees her as a kind of sexual object and fantasizes about her. And the third section is told from the perspective of her sister, who's obviously a lot more caring and loving and maybe a little bit more rational in her perspective of her and just trying to understand her sister. So it's a really interesting character study that doesn't really give you much of an insight into the actual character, but 3 different people's perspectives on her, although there are a couple of points where you see things from the point of view of the main character, the woman who's decided to be a vegetarian, but not often. Absolutely adored this book, think it's really fascinating, really quick read, and I really want to read more of Han Kang's stuff. Now to mix things up with a slightly more disappointing book, and that is Tom McCarthy's Satin Island. This is one of the Man Booker long list at the time, although now it is a shortlisted book as well. I do have lots of tabs in it, I had lots of thoughts, but I'm not going to say that a lot of those are positive thoughts. I didn't really like this book. I originally gave it 3 out of 5 stars, but the more I thought about it, I've lowered it to 2. I don't think it's like an atrocity. I wouldn't give it 1 star, and I know people that really enjoy it. It's just so not my cup of tea. I did not find it interesting. I think Nicola over at Robotnik describes it the right way and says like it's anthropology 101. It's a very interesting way to have written a book. It's not really got a plot, and it's not told in a traditional narrative structure. It's basically lots of little thoughts, little paragraphs, little pages of ideas from this corporate anthropologist's mind as he kind of gets on with his day and his business. He's sort of attempting to do an anthropological study on the human race and society as like a grand scheme, but I honestly found the character to be very irritating. Some of the stuff he said was really obvious. There were points in it where I did think, oh, this is picking up, this is a little bit more interesting. I feel like I see where he's coming from on this is a thought. There were other points where I was like, did you literally just say that? It was not my cup of tea, I'm sorry to say. But like I said, Lauren and Jen love it, so I'll maybe link their reviews down below because you might like it. I don't know. Obviously the judges of the Man Booker Prize like it, but I think it is going to be a Marmite, and some of you are going to love it, some of you are going to hate it. Next up is a book. I actually listened to an audiobook from Audible, but I have a physical copy as well, and I did sort of read along with some of the bits. And it is Mycroft Home by Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and Anna Waterhouse. This is a Sherlock Holmes story, a modern Sherlock Holmes story, but not about Sherlock Holmes, in fact, about Mycroft Holmes, Sherlock Holmes' older brother. In this, Sherlock Holmes is only about 16. It is Mycroft's a young man in his first job in the British government. He's about 23, he's newly engaged. Holmes is like an insignificant character at this point. He hasn't built up the following that he does in his life. It is a mystery, it's a good fun fast-paced mystery, and it kind of shows you how Mycroft Holmes becomes the man he is in the Sherlock Holmes series, or at least obviously these authors' interpretation of how he becomes the man he is in the Sherlock Holmes series by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. I think it's a lot of fun. I think if you like Sherlock Holmes, if you like Sherlock Holmes stories by Anthony Horowitz, those kind of retellings as well, you'll probably really like this. My only objection to it was that there was like very little female characters, because otherwise it was really interesting and like a lot of fun and a really good book, and there's just a few things I would have changed. Next up, I finished, because I didn't start reading it this month, it took me a while to read this one. It is A Brief History of 7 Killings by Marlon James, which has also been shortlisted for the Man Booker Prize 2015. This book, like, took me quite a long time to read. It's very deceptively published. It's not brief, and it's actually a lot longer than it looks. It's about 700 pages. It's just published on very thin paper with quite small print. This book, like, it is not like the kind of book I would usually read. Like, I would not usually pick up this kind of book. And it was a really interesting book to read. I think it did what it intended to do very, very well. Although, warning, there is a lot of murder, death, rape, swearing, like all the horrible things in this book. It is basically structured around the attempted assassination of Bob Marley in Jamaica, which is kind of the centre point of this story. We get before, we get after, and although that might make you think it's a book about Bob Marley, it's really not about a book about Bob Marley. He is just like a thread that strings everything together. He's never really referred to by name in the book, he's always referred to the singer. We don't really meet him in the book. It's told from multiple perspectives, none of which are Bob Marley or even people particularly close to Bob Marley, just people who've maybe encountered him or have a reason to be thinking about him or considering him. Basically a piece of like modern historical fiction about the Jamaican ghettos and American CIA interactions with Jamaica and all that kind of stuff in the 1970s. Really, really interesting and really, really well done. Really intense and really violent. That's another reason why I think it took me a little bit longer to read, because there was just some points where I needed to put it down because it was just getting quite overwhelming. But I would recommend it. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars, and I do think it is a good book. I would maybe put a bet on this one is going to be the winner of the Man Booker Prize. But I honestly have no idea, so it might not. I also read 2 books on my Kindle, the first of which is Roses by G.R. Mannering, who's actually a YouTuber as well, so I'll link her channel down below. I really enjoyed this book. I downloaded it on my Kindle ages ago and I'd been meaning to read it for ages. I finally got around to it, and as soon as I got into it I could not put it down. It was a very addictive story. It is a retelling of Beauty and the Beast, although what I loved about this story was that most of it wasn't the traditional story of Beauty and Beast, you know, the point where Belle goes to live with the Beast and they get to know each other and all of that kind of stuff. Like, that's the story we all think of, like the Disney film story. Most of the book was actually the time before that, and Beauty, as she's called in this book, Beauty's life, like before she goes and meets the Beast, although that does happen in it later, is there. It is a retelling of Beauty and the Beast, but most of it is about Beauty's like childhood and like time into her teenage years and her growing up in this fantasy world that Rose has created, where the world is kind of divided in war between magic folk and non-magic folk, and it's such an interesting world, and I'm pretty sure there are going to be other books set in that world. I think they're going to be continuing on from the first book, but about different characters with maybe just crossovers with the original characters from Roses, if that makes sense. So I'm really excited to see more books set in this world. I think they're going to be great. I think Rose's writing can only get better. I thought it was such a nice idea. I really like the way she executed it, and I just really enjoyed reading it. And last but not least, on my Kindle I also read The Stone Gods by Jeanette Winterson, which I had done a review of, so you can check that out if you want to know more of my thoughts. It was my first Jeanette Winterson book. Absolutely adored it, gave it 4 out of 5 stars. Like I said, there's been a lot of good books this month. And it's basically a science fiction novel split into 3 parts, almost like 3 separate stories that are woven together. They do, they are connected, and you kind of learn how they're connected as they go on, but they're all set in different time periods. But the first story begins with our main character living on a planet where they basically destroyed the planet and need to find a new planet to move to, and the human race has just gone crazy. All the like extreme things that we think we might do in the future we have done, and the whole book is a look at kind of our self-destructive nature and how we build things to break them down, and just how we're constantly hurting the world around us. It makes you think, what can I do to stop hurting the world? Yeah, it is really, really good, and I can't wait to read more Jeanette Winterson. But yeah, those are all the books I've read this month. I am like midway through quite a few other books, so I imagine that October is just going to be another massive reading roundup. But I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you want reviews of any of the books I haven't reviewed, then let me know. And until next time guys, happy reading. I'll see you all again soon. Bye! No, it is time to film my monthly rabbit. Rabbit?